Sydney Quintin is a college student who's now a Democratic nominee for the South Carolina House District 98, which covers the North Charleston part of Dorchester County. She faces current state representative Chris Murphy in November. I talked one-on-one with Sydney about why she's running for this district for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Sydney Quintin, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. You are a college student at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, and you are the daughter of two military veterans. You also have lived in, obviously, in District 98, where you want to represent as state representative since you were 8 years old when your dad retired. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this: since you are a Democratic nominee for State House District 98, which is basically, the North Charleston part of Dorchester County, what got you from actually growing up in the district to now wanting to represent the district in Columbia?
So obviously, I've been in District 98. I've grown up in District 98, and the entire time that Chris Murphy has represented District 98, I've lived there. And over the last 12 years, I've seen firsthand the impacts of a lack of leadership coming from our area. And I couldn't justify Chris running unopposed for another election. And I figured I could do a better job than he was. So I decided to do it.
So what is your definition of lack of leadership coming from current state representative Chris Murphy?
Right. Well, I mean, first of all, he doesn't show up. He's had the worst attendance record of anybody in the House this year. And it's been pretty consistently low over the last decade. So I think the first step is, having somebody who's actually going to show up. He's also extremely, inaccessible, and he's unreliable. You never see him around the district. He's not involved in anything that goes on. And I think it's unfortunate that we are feeling so much of the burden of the growth in South Carolina, in the Charleston area and then up in the Cane Bay area. And the growth that we're experiencing is phenomenal, except for the fact that the people who live here aren't getting the support that they need in terms of infrastructure, public education, and nothing's being done about it. So.
And I want to talk to you about that in just a second. But what are the last figures of the population for District 98?
Say that again.
What are the last figures of population for District 98?
It's about 46,000 people.
So what is that pace of growth in your district right now?
I have no idea. I don't actually know the growth. What I do know is, over the last 12 years, we've seen Mercedes, we've seen Volvo, we've seen growth at Boeing, and we're bringing people here to South Carolina, or providing job opportunities to South Carolina, but we're not increasing, basic infrastructure needs, expanding Dorchester Road in any capacity. We're not increasing the amount of public schools in the area. Eagle Nest Elementary School in North Charleston opened, and from day one, they were overcrowded. So the fact that we're not actually doing anything to allow for people to comfortably live in these areas, it takes away from the fact that jobs are here.
So where exactly are the jobs in Sydney?
So obviously we've got Volvo, we've got Mercedes, and there's been a lot of growth and development downtown in the Charleston area. And District 98 is a very, very suburban area. It's primarily homes, neighborhoods, schools. So really the people are living in District 98. And it's a phenomenal school district. We're in DD2, but we're also one of the lowest funded school districts in the area. And we're feeling that impact at the schools. I graduated from Fort Dorchester High School, and unfortunately, some of the really incredible educational opportunities that they had, like the International Baccalaureate degree program, is no longer at Fort because they couldn't afford to keep it. We've got a teacher turnover rate that is extremely, extremely detrimental to the students who are trying to have opportunities to be competitive at a national level when they're applying to schools. And then obviously we're failing our graduates because they're not ready to be able to enter the workforce after they graduate high school.
Well, let me take it a little bit back because I want to break it all down. You talk about obviously that district being suburban. How many new homes have been built at a fairly consistent rate in your district?
I wish I knew that. I don't.
You talk about the teacher retention. What is that current teacher retention rate in your district?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know it's been fairly consistent with the rest of the state. I don't know how much that it kind of deviates, though, in DD2 versus kind of the state's average.
And I know, obviously, you talked about the growth in that particular area. Where exactly is that growth in District 98 right now?
So really a lot of the growth that we're experiencing has been in the suburban, areas. We've seen expansions to the Westcott area. We've seen expansion up in the Somerville area, kind of the Ashboro East, kind of area of the district. So we've been feeling a lot of that, the amount of people coming in, and obviously there's some turnover because we've got the Air Force Base right, kind of on the other side of the district, closer on that North Charleston side.
Well, what exactly would be your plan for the expansion of Dorchester Road?
So I think first of all, we need to address the fact that Dorchester Road needs to at least be 3 lanes going both ways. We have the space to do it. There's no reason that we should have that big of a median. And I think we need to start being creative with how we're addressing traffic and congestion issues. There are places all over the country, kind of Olathe, Kansas is one that comes to mind, that they've been able to really, address traffic and congestion in a very creative and efficient way. And obviously Kansas is radically different in terms of just the sheer amount of space. But I think it's important that we start bringing in, creative thinkers to South Carolina to be able to address these issues that we haven't been able to address up to this point.
So what exactly let me ask you this. What's your 10-year plan that you would actually submit to the Department of Transportation, obviously, to correct the backlog of maintenance and actually fix roads in District 98?
So I think part of it has to, we have to work with the county. The state isn't really, working necessarily with the counties. And in Dorchester County, we've got the penny tax that's going to be up on the ballot again this year, and it's a renewal of that.
Do you support that?
I do. I think that for right now, I think we need to make sure that we are being able to maintain the projects that the county has been focusing on. I would like to make sure that money is being spent efficiently and effectively and with a level of transparency that is appropriate for the constituents of Dorchester County. So being able to make sure that we see where that money is going. So I think in terms of a 10-year plan, I don't have necessarily one planned out yet, but I think a lot of it has to do with making sure we're being proactive and not reactive with the solutions that we're doing. We need to make sure that we are looking forward to establish some kind of, expectation to make sure that whatever we want to do here in South Carolina and in the Low Country, we are taking those steps up front to make sure that we have the capacity to bring those people here, to expand job opportunities here, and ensure that we're not having to, deal with the constant burden of traffic.
Let me ask, and obviously, unfortunately, this interview will have to be condensed due to the rain outside, but let me ask you this. What are the current infrastructure projects right now in District 98?
So I know in Dorchester County, there are a handful in terms of kind of that, the farther area of Dorchester County out kind of near Ridgeville and out that Somerville area. But from my understanding, there's not a whole lot that's actually being done in District 98 to address the issues and the traffic that we're facing there.
Well, let me ask you this, Ms. Sidney. How would you create a permanent funding source, say for maintenance and road capacity in District 98?
Yeah, so I think there are a handful of options that we can do. I think one of them is making sure that these massive companies that are coming into South Carolina, they aren't getting these huge tax breaks to come here. There's no incentive for them to really invest in the community if they don't have to, pay taxes in the state that that they're settling in. I also think that opportunities like the legalization of marijuana can provide a massive, financial opportunity. And so I think it's just a matter of being creative and making sure that the burden isn't being placed solely on the taxpayer. Obviously when the government doesn't do their job, we are having to make up for that, whether it's, our car insurance rates or, having to sit in traffic and waste even more money. So I think it's a matter of trying to kind of reframe how we view, the financial burden. So I think we've got to make sure that the state government's doing what they should be doing and providing the roads that are, quality to be able to provide for the people in this state.
So what are the tax breaks right now currently in South Carolina?
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. You want to legalize marijuana. So if it is to be legalized at some point, it's in some people's minds, how much money would that be bringing back to your District 98?
I don't know. I really don't think it would necessarily kind of directly impact 98 a whole lot in terms of financial gain outside of just kind of the overarching benefit of having that taxable income in South Carolina in general. What it would do is address more of the social issues in District 98 for, medicinal purposes, whether it's PTSD or chronic pain or cancer, addressing those issues at the level in District 98 for people to benefit from in their own individual lives.
So if tax breaks were to continue in South Carolina, in particular your district, then what incentives would you want to have for these companies that want to bring their companies to District 98, for instance?
Yeah, well, I think part of it, we have to make sure that we're providing the people for these companies to come to South Carolina. We've got agreements with companies like Volvo and Mercedes that they are to employ a certain percentage of South Carolina high school graduates. And unfortunately, we aren't providing students, the opportunities within their K through 12 educational, career to be able to qualify for these jobs and in career opportunities with these companies. So we're not holding up our end of the bargain already. So I think all of these things are very much intertwined together. And I don't think there's ever going to be one solution that's kind of a fix-all for everybody. But I think a lot of it has to do with taking a step back and looking at all of these different pieces to be able to kind of reverse some of the issues that we've put in place. So I think all of them are very much contingent on other things.
What other issues would you try to reverse back if you could?
I think one of the big things, and this is something that I've been very passionate about for a long time, is gun violence. We're seeing here in South Carolina, massive amounts of gun violence, whether it's, accidental or unintentional shootings, and domestic abuse instances, and addressing some of the things that have not been addressed, like the Charleston loophole, and ensuring that people who should not have firearms don't have access to firearms. So that's one thing that I think would, South Carolina would benefit from tremendously. It's a matter of life and death, and we continue to see an increase in the amount of violence and gun violence here in South Carolina.
Speaking of gun violence, according to my research for Sydney, it's not the number one killer of kids unless you add teens and young adults 18 and 19 years of age to the mix. Almost 30% of all gun deaths are gang violence. 80% of all violent crime is gang violence, and 80% of gun deaths are suicides, which less than 1% is from mass shootings, let alone with an AR-15. So what is your 5-point plan to actually combat gang violence, particularly in Dorchester County?
Yeah, so I think to start, the term gang violence is oftentimes kind of, folks, I think, use it to kind of distract from the fact that it's, there are firearms easily accessible to anybody who wants them. I think one of the biggest things, and something that I've been a big advocate for years, is community and hospital-based violence intervention programs. Cities across the country have seen massive amounts of success, and unfortunately it's in cities that already have kind of a bad rep in terms of the amount of violence and gun violence that they experience. But MUSC has been working with their Rising Tides program as a hospital-based violence intervention program, and I think investing in those programs, they see massive amounts of success in terms of mentorship, in terms of violence de-escalation, there are so many benefits to programs like that. And there are so many people here in South Carolina that are doing that work already, and they just need the support. So I think that's one of the big key parts of kind of a plan to address the gun violence. I also think that we need to ensure that we have comprehensive background checks, and we close that Charleston loophole, and essentially, make sure that if a background check is not completed, you don't then just automatically acquire a firearm. So those are kind of the three big points that I think would do, massive amounts of benefit to the amount of gun violence that we're experiencing.
But when you talk about gang violence, Ms. Sydney, let me ask you this, because in the reports that I've seen over here in the Low Country, that's increasing a lot. So what exactly is your plan to combat gang violence?
Well, again, I think there's never going to be a one solution. So obviously the community and hospital-based violence interventions, but also ensuring that we have spaces for young people to, hang out, to have space to exist as young people, whether that's, community centers that have extracurricular opportunities, job training opportunities, and we're investing in the people of South Carolina. We can't just let folks, fall to the wayside because we refuse to invest in the programs that matter or into the schools. We've got to make sure that we are looking at this comprehensively to look at every possible way to make small steps to benefiting people.
When you talk about community resources, I know particularly in your district, you also have some of the YMCA and the YWCA. So how would you work with them to expand these programs and resources?
I think one of the big things is partnering with some of the other existent, programs and centers that are already in the Low Country. I think oftentimes we feel like we have to kind of reinvent the wheel, and we don't work together kind of as a coalition like we should. I also think that partnering with a lot of the schools would really benefit folks, I think. And as a Fort Dorchester graduate, being able to kind of see firsthand some of the gaps and opportunities, whether it was social opportunities, extracurricular opportunities that kind of existed in our area. I think it's important that we work together cohesively. So I think a lot of it has to do with, again, kind of that interrelationship between all of these issues. So making sure that we are working together to kind of comprehensively address these things.
What relationships do you all have right now with these particular companies and obviously organizations?
Mm-hmm. So in the high schools, in DD2 at least, we do work with Trident Technical College for some of the workforce development stuff and some of the trade school programs. I think that expanding those would be, a huge benefit. I also think that kind of rethinking the way we approach, post high school would make a big difference. There's such a press to attend college, and college is not for everyone. College is not what everyone wants, and it's not the sole way to kind of reach what we all view as success. And I think that expanding those programs and making sure that we're giving them the resources and also the credibility that they deserve.
How about the funding?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Now, speaking of obviously education, I got to take you back obviously to teachers. That's been a big issue for the past 2 years, particularly with COVID. Should teacher pay, in your mind, Ms. Sydney, be an average of 5% over the next 2 years?
I'm trying to think the math in my head. I'm not a math person. At the very root of it, the public school teachers have to be paid like professionals and treated like professionals. I think that the increase in pay that we have seen already is a very, very small baby step towards where we need to be. And I think that any, increase to that is going to, benefit us. Again, like, our public school teachers are quite literally responsible for ensuring that the next generation of our society is capable of, existing in our society. And we have to pay those teachers what they deserve to be paid and paid like professionals and the professionals that they are.
So would that figure, if you were elected to the House, include an annual step increases on the teacher's salary schedule?
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this. Would the state in your mind, or should the state in your mind, actually fund individualized professional growth for teachers?
I would have to think about that. I think in general we have to certainly provide, kind of those the incentives for the growth and development. We're kind of within the profession. So that I've not thought about that. So I would have to think about that.
And obviously, another big topic since the beginning of COVID, obviously, as you know, is mental health.
Right.
What ideal funding would you propose in the State House for mental health and for students and teachers?
So that's a great question. In terms of very specifics, I poured over the budget this year, and I couldn't tell you everything that was in it. But there has been some kind of funding, allocated for mental health services. I think a lot of it has to do with what are we actually viewing as mental health, especially in the school system, and oftentimes what are the the qualifications, or what are the job kind of descriptions for these people, because so often you've got these guidance counselors who are nothing more than kind of postgraduate guidance, and they're tasked with trying to make sure that 250, 300, 400 students are getting the needs and necessities that they are. So I think a lot of it has to do with kind of this this culture of mental health, and ensuring that we are kind of, as a community, whether it's as a state, as a district, whether it's in your schools, really making sure that we are providing a space for safe conversations about mental health. It's still very stigmatized, especially in the schools, and it's difficult to kind of automatically have this open and honest conversation about mental health when it's still very much kind of looked down on. So I think a lot of it has to do with providing the funding for true mental health professionals whose sole responsibility is mental health services in the schools, and really just kind of shifting this narrative about mental health. And again, I think a lot of it is trying to be proactive as opposed to reactive, and that I think is the same for mental health. We can't, after some kind of crisis, whether it's an individual crisis or kind of a collective crisis, that we are all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, we have to address this, and it's something that we should have been addressing at the the very beginning, to make sure that we're able to cope with these things.
So, how do they view mental health within the schools, and how do they view mental health outside of the schools?
So I know for me, in my experience at Fort Dorchester, there wasn't ever really a whole lot of conversation about, mental health. We all talked quite a bit about, saying no to drugs and kind of those things. And I found that it was very difficult to kind of break that culture of, stigma around mental health. My sophomore year of high school was, that spring was the shooting at Parkland, Florida. And that was the catalyst for me to get involved politically. But what it also kind of did was made me completely rethink the way I viewed everything in my own school. Obviously, I'm part of the generation that's kind of coined as the active shooter generation, because my entire life has been spent in public school system that we've been doing active shooter drills, and really looking within my own school at how little we were doing to address the needs of students, and letting things just kind of exist and not really be able to talk about whether it was the fear that we had as students, or even just, our own individual experiences. Fort Dorchester High School is, I think, one of the most perfect kind of microcosms of society, because you've got, a very diverse student body population that's very indicative of what this country looks like. And it was always something that I really valued about that school. And we were never kind of given the space to talk about our experiences in our own personal lives. And it was very much, kind of a hush hush conversation. So I think in the schools, it's something that we've got to address from kind of a culture perspective, but also just having, that space to discuss things.
So when it comes to obviously mental health, what are those other stigmas that need to be broken within the high schools?
So I think a lot of it has to do with just recognizing that all of us struggle with, our own personal battles. And it's not a weakness to ask for help. That's something that my parents have always very much kind of stressed to me, and kind of preached throughout my entire life, is that it's not a weakness to ask for help. And I think a lot of us view, seeking any kind of help, whether it's from, a more casual relationship, whether it's a friend or a parent or a teacher, or even, or up to professional help. So I think that is probably one of the biggest kind of, stigmas that we have to be able to kind of combat, to be able to really address mental health at kind of its root cause.
And let's go back into the classroom. You know all about this as well as being a student, but let's talk about class sizes. Let me ask you, Ms. Sydney, smaller classes would raise student achievement by what percentage?
So I don't know the actual percentage, but I can tell you from personal experience that it is the benefit. I don't really think you can quantify truly the benefit of having smaller class sizes, being able to develop those relationships with your teacher and also with your peers in a very intimate setting. It provides you that space to, explore critical thinking skills, explore kind of these ideas that we're talking about and learning about. And it just makes things so much easier, honestly, to be able to kind of work on what you need as an individual student. So I know there's a number for it. I don't know what it is, but I can tell you that from personal experience, I don't think it's truly quantifiable to be able to express how important it is to have smaller class sizes.
So how small is too small? Well, how small is small, and for how long when it comes to those class sizes?
So I think it depends on the schools, and I think it depends on kind of, the area. I don't think there's a one size fits all. Fort Dorchester High School has 2,500 students, 2,800 students.
Okay.
And I don't think it's necessarily realistic to have, 8 students in a classroom. But I also think it's completely unrealistic that a class of 34 or 35 students is going to, the students are going to get what they need. So I think it's about kind of adjusting based off of what the student body looks like, what the student body needs, and kind of where we're at socially. I think right now, especially, young people are feeling the stress of the political life. And I think, oftentimes young people are discounted as being, they don't care, don't pay attention. And I don't think that's necessarily completely true. We've got social media and we've got, the internet at our fingertips constantly, all day, every day, 24/7. And I think it's very overwhelming. So I think at a time like this, it would be important to have smaller class sizes than maybe it was 10, 15 years ago. So I think it's really just kind of looking at individual circumstances within school districts, within schools, and kind of what the world is facing.
So how much does it cost to actually reduce class sizes?
Well, obviously, we would have to increase the amount of teachers. And unfortunately, we're kind of in this cycle right now here in South Carolina because there already is a teacher shortage. And we've seen, I think this year it was like 1 in 7 teachers quit teaching at the end of the year and aren't returning, next year. And so it's difficult to really be able to try and talk about, decreasing classroom sizes when we're already facing a teacher shortage. So I think it's, one of those things we're going to have to try and figure out the balance of what are we able to do in terms of decreasing class sizes, but also making sure that we have enough teachers to be able to do that.
So how many teachers have been lost in District 98, and how many teachers do you all need right now?
So DD2 is one of the district. We're right kind of in the middle. We haven't had, the most amount of teachers leave. I trying to think. The last I saw was at the end of last school year, so May timeframe. I have the number somewhere. If I'm not mistaken, we're kind of right in the middle. I know Charleston County has experienced more teacher loss than we have, but again, DD2 is one of the lowest funded school districts in the state, and per pupil we spend about $3,000 less, and our teachers are being paid a little bit less than some of the other school districts in the state.
So when you compare the other school districts to the DD2 when it comes to low funding, where are you guys?
So we are on the lower end. If I'm not mistaken, we're kind of in like the lower third of the school districts. So, unfortunately, it's tough to. DD2 has done extremely well, and we've got high graduation rates, and we've got good numbers on paper, and where we're lacking is kind of those efficacy rates in the students who are graduating. At Fort Dorchester, in the 2020-2021 school year, we saw about a 30% difference between the graduation rates and the math and reading efficacy rates. And there's no reason that our students should be graduating from high school if they can't read and do math at the level that they should be. So, those are kind of those tangible impacts to not funding our schools appropriately, especially in DD2. And again, programs like IB programs, some of our arts programs are feeling that burden. But again, it's difficult, especially in DD2, to be able to say, we're an underfunded school district, but we've got this culinary program, we've got this, these horticulture programs. So there's a lot of, it's a difficult thing to try and kind of reconcile. But I think it's felt more obviously at the teacher pay kind of conversation, but also kind of at that individual student success kind of level.
So what is the achievement gap between minority students and non-minority students?
So I can't find that data. I've looked. Obviously trends, statewide trends, national trends kind of point to there is a pretty significant achievement gap. I don't know specifically about DD2. I've tried to find it and can't really find anything. So unfortunately, there's not necessarily a number we can point to in the area.
Save Women's Act. In hindsight, should privacy have been part of that particular bill?
Absolutely. We're at a point that if we don't have the right to privacy, then what do we have? And the threat to privacy, and not just for reproductive purposes, but just kind of in general, is something that I think will have irreversible brain fart. It's a Sunday. Irreversible damage for the people in South Carolina and everywhere.
And obviously another big issue right now, obviously in the House and around the world and around the country, is about trans and obviously sports. Is there any documentation, Ms. Sidney, that trans in sports is a problem in your particular district?
No. And to be fair, it's a non-issue for 99.99% of people in South Carolina. I think it's unfortunate that we are politicizing an issue that is extremely, extremely kind of hostile, just in nature. And, it's one of those times where national politics and national talking points gets brought down and infests our state politics. There's so many other things that are impacting South Carolinians on a daily basis. And, this issue is not one of them, if that makes sense.
But can you cite an example of trans girls in sports in your particular district, District 98?
I can't.
How many high school students that is participate actually in high school sports altogether in South Carolina?
Oh, total? I have no idea. I know it's quite a few.
How do you know how many transgender kids are actually playing high school sports right here in South Carolina?
If I'm not mistaken, and I can't remember where I saw this, I think it was 2 students
Now,
in the state.
in the state. Now, let me ask you this: how many transgender students actually play girls sports in South Carolina?
I have no idea. That might have been the 2 students that I'm recalling, but I don't remember where I saw it. And it was probably on Twitter, so the reliability of that information may not be the best.
Well, let me ask you this, Ms. Sydney. Should the Save Women's Act bill have addressed it? Cisgender guys competing against cisgender women.
You know, I tried to stay out of that particular bill conversation. I think, again, it's one of those unfortunate talking points that we have allowed to kind of take up more space than it necessarily needed to. This conversation is extremely dangerous to trans children, and it's extremely dangerous to, this overall, kind of culture of homophobia and transphobia in general. So I think that the bill itself was, again, this issue is a non-issue in South Carolina, and it's a non-issue for the everyday lives of the vast majority of South Carolinians. So I think that legislating this is giving, those transphobic kind of ideas a place to kind of fester and grow.
Well, let me give you quickly, because I have 3 minutes left. Zoom is only giving me 3 minutes. Then what will be your plan to protect these transgender women and men, particularly in schools?
So I think one of the first steps is, actually passing a hate crimes bill. We're one of 2 states that does not have one. And obviously it's been a big conversation in terms of the Mother Emanuel shooting and kind of trying to make amends in, some form or fashion for what happened in 2015. But, allowing for a hate crimes bill to be passed and to have that set in law here in South Carolina would, make it possible for students who are trans or even, just, gay to be able to, have a way to be protected under the law without it having to be a federal offense.
Quickly, abortion. People in the state that I talk to ask us if a woman is forced to have a baby by the South Carolina legislator and dies in childbirth, unfortunately, should the state compensate her family for the value of her life?
Absolutely. The state has absolutely no reason to be involved in medical decisions for the people of South Carolina. And if they want to try and legislate, medical decisions, then they should have to reap the consequences of that.
Yes or no? Should South Carolina lawmakers consider punishing abusers with involuntary vaccinities instead of punishing victims with involuntary pregnancies?
Say that one more time so I can be clear.
Yes, ma'am. Should South Carolina lawmakers consider punishing abusers with involuntary vaccinities instead of punishing victims with involuntary pregnancies?
So I think if we're talking, I don't think they should be legislating any medical decisions. But let's at least, fight fire with fire in some way. So if it's a political play, then okay. But I don't think that the state legislature should be involved in anybody's medical decisions.
As a disclaimer, I did reach out to current state representative Chris Murphy and left a message with his office. They told me that they were going to get him in contact with me. That never happened. So I hope to get him back here on Quintin's Close-Up soon. But Sydney Quintin, thank you for your time here on Quintin's Close-Ups. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.